senior consultant for senior human capital management for Frontline Education. Paul just mentioned Frontline. And, but she had 18 years in HR in schools, and she shared with me that was living the dream. So at any rate, she has now gone on to do other HR sorts of things, and as a consultant for Frontline, as I said. Since we're making up time, I'm not going to read her whole bio, but I will just introduce Cydney, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, I'm not quite as vertically gifted as you, so I'm going to go ahead and say hello, or hey y'all, as they talk from my parts. My name is Cydney Miller, and I am from Nashville, Tennessee. I, of course, as was mentioned, was a former Human Resources Director for 18 years, and yes, I did live the dream, laughed the laughs, cried the tears, and hid in the bathroom at time or 58. Or my HR friends, because you know what I mean, right? I think we've all been there. Well, today we're going to talk about the business of the new generation educator. And a lot of what was already discussed today is going to tie right into our conversation. But before we do that, I want us to take a step back. I want us to put all the phones away, computers away, because so often we don't get the luxury to put it all away for a second and stop and reflect on all of the things that were talked about earlier today, that were talked about the wonderful presentation from the Highlights organization. And I want you to take a step back in time when you, yourselves, were thinking about what did you want to be when you grew up. When you were sitting in the dentist office, as I was, reading your highlights, searching for that animal, and where are my highlights crew? There is a tiger from 1982 that I am convinced was not in there. Okay, I'm still looking for the tiger. But think about, what did you want to be when you grew up? Any courageous post-lunch attendees willing to say, just shout it out? Yes.
Superhero.
Superhero. Good job. I wanted to be Wonder Woman, so maybe there's still a chance for it.
We'll talk later.
Okay. All right. What else? We have a superhero. Any? How many? Teacher. Teacher. Very good. Any budding rock stars out there? Ballerinas, firefighters? Fighter pilot? Okay. So other than you, I can't see your name.
Chris
the superhero, and the Bonnie. Other than Bonnie, how many of you, when you were these little guys' age, sitting in the dentist office reading your Highlights magazine, how many of you wanted to be a teacher? Raise your hand. Okay, we have a handful. And I'm not going to ask any of you to raise your hand, but I want you to think, how many kids today, sitting in the dentist office or on the bus or anywhere, are thinking about education? Not very many. How many of them are saying, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be part of the greatest profession there is to be in? And that's kind of a sad state of affairs. But what if, just what if, all of us in this room got to be the superhero and got to change that narrative? We really do have the opportunity to do that in our roles every single day. Has anyone heard of this thing we call shortage? Teacher shortage, sub shortage, bus driver shortage, fill in the blank shortage. That's a thing that's really a reality for us. But I'm going to argue a point today. I don't actually think there's a shortage. That's usually where I get that weird, how did she get picked to speak? Is she serious, or is this a joke? Should we laugh? But I don't believe there is actually a shortage. Because to say there's a shortage of any of those areas is to say that there is a shortage of people. It's not a shortage of teachers or substitutes or bus drivers. It's a shortage of people who are choosing those professions. And that changes the scope of the conversation, doesn't it? Because really it makes it about the job itself. And it makes it about the environment that we are creating for the front line of your districts, of your organizations. If we, as an organization of leaders, can say that we can change the narrative of education and make it a job worth choosing, we may just be able to mitigate that thing we call shortage for all of the above reasons. So I challenge you to think a little bit differently today, and we're going to actually concentrate our discussion today on the fact that if we focus on the job and we focus on the capability that we have to collaborate and to change the narrative, we may just have an opportunity to change that narrative for all. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the new education landscape that is a little bit different, where students aren't necessarily dreaming about education, but they could be. But what are the realities for our employees, teachers, etc.? And then I'm going to take us into a new way of thinking, where it's not just about HR anymore, where it's about an everybody game, where technology, business, operations, and HR all sit around at the same table, not in their different silos. We used to joke in my HR department that we just love to go upstairs and talk to people because we were literally downstairs and everybody else was upstairs. And how did we get to that table upstairs where we're all talking? So we're going to talk about ways we could and should do that. And then we're going to go through a few examples of how we can look at data and insights to start driving those conversations. Dr. Howard talked this morning about data and about helping our students and creating an equitable environment for students. Why not do that for our employees, or even better yet, for ourselves? How do we create that? We'll talk a little bit about that and end with the actual transition into strategic action that you can take within your organizations. So let's set the tone. Let's paint a picture of the reality of today's education environment. Today's education landscape is a bleak one. Is that a fair word? Does anybody in here think it's perfect and fabulous and everybody's choosing teaching and we're not losing teachers? No? I've got some nods, I've got some agreement. Well, if you look at the education landscape, almost 1/3 of educators today are in their first 3 years of teaching. That's pretty profound. 1/3 of our workforce are brand new. They're the ones that are starving for that support and really needing we as leaders to help them cross that initial bridge that we all had mentors and support systems when we did that. What are we doing to provide that? A very alarming statistic that might not be too much of a surprise to you is the dramatic decline in people choosing the profession, just like we talked about. So for every percentage that we can change that -27, the better we're doing about creating a supply. And we're going to talk more about that. And there are actually, sadly, only 5 states in the United States that are actually seeing an uptick in teacher preparation. So we definitely have an education landscape that's shifting in the wrong direction. So what's that mean for Ohio? What you're seeing here is enrollment statistics provided by Title II. Any of you who have access to all of these reports, if you just access the Title II information, which you probably already have, this may not look like much of a surprise to you. What's interesting, having now had the opportunity to work with every state in the United States, Ohio is in a really good position when it comes to overall teacher enrollment. Granted, you see a bit of a decline in the overall enrollment numbers in the state. So that's something to look at. But think about this. We're now looking at the number of teacher preparation completers. How many people are familiar with this statistic? A handful. Let's go back to people who are enrolling. In the most recent year where Title II has statistics, we're seeing an enrollment of over 14,000, which is not that significant of a decline year over year. But if we go from 14,000 to 4, is that alarming to anyone? We talk a lot about recruitment, we talk a lot about retention, but do we talk about it in our institutes of higher ed? What are we doing at the organization and district level to say, neighboring institute of higher ed, what can we do to help you with your recruitment and your retention? What are we doing to bridge that gap across the road, so to speak, and say, what can we do to help better prepare each of your students for our students? Are any of you creating partnerships, not just for purposes of recruiting, but for helping them to retain education preparation enrollees? Because if we look statistically, we're losing a drastic number before they ever get to the infamous day where they get to throw their boarder hat into the air. And we need to get them there. So I've introduced a term now, we're explaining that, retention. In our district, we used to call our recruiting philosophy, our retention first staffing. Because without beginning with the end in mind, to borrow a very famous phrase, we need to begin with the end in mind. Because if we're losing teachers and educators at the alarming numbers, we need to make sure that we're filling the holes in the bucket. It's equally as important as we are recruiting from those institutes of higher ed in other areas. So if we look at retention first as a starting point, we can see that 34% of districts attribute part of the shortage issue to retention. How many of you, if you're willing to raise your hand, or maybe you can do that sort of half wave, hi speaker, that's sort of me. How many of you are tracking your retention data? Okay, I got a few sorters. All right, what about your recruitment data? Probably a little bit more common. Well, through a survey through Frontline Education, we see that 64% of districts aren't analyzing this data at all. And 25% don't analyze recruitment or retention data. So they're not even really sure what's happening. We're losing them, we can't get them, but we don't know why. So that's something that we as organizations need to step back and take a look at. And if we're supporting school districts, helping them to have the necessary data to really know how to drive their strategic decision making so that they really can start to address some of these issues. Where are my finance friends? You can, loud and proud, guys. Who loves money? Now I know y'all all know, I'll ruin y'all. Oh, come on. Okay, we all love money. Does money grow on trees in Ohio, or is that just Tennessee? It does. Okay, note to self, move to Ohio. The impact of retention is a significant one. The cost of replacing a teacher is significant. If you think about, let's say on average you lost 20 teachers a year, and you could reduce that by 2. For those that are in smaller rural districts, could you find something to do with $8,800? If not, see me after, I'll give you my address, you can send it to me. What about some of the larger areas? $18,000, that's significant. And equally as significant to the cost ramifications is the fact that we are losing teachers in numbers that are so significant from a cost standpoint, but also from an instructional standpoint. Over half of our new teachers are leaving the profession within their first 3 years. And then we start to look at some of our subcategories, we have an even harder, more exponential problem to deal with. So let's take, for example, special education. Is special education a high need area for many of you? Yes. I got a definite yes on that one. Very good. We are going to actually, during our breakout session at 4 o'clock today, talk a little bit more about special education and the recruitment and hire to retire journey of a special education employee. But just to kind of give you a perspective, having done a lot of research on the voice of the special education employee, we're hearing some surprising things about why they are leaving the profession. Inadequate support is right at the top. How many of you would have expected us to say the reason that we're losing these teachers is because of, hey, benefits? In fact, every statistic that I read in preparation for the conference this week didn't even have pay and benefits in the top 6%. We are losing teachers because we aren't supporting them effectively. And where does support come from? From all of us. We're also seeing that the professional isolation and the understanding of their work is important. So now we're starting to bring in communication and understanding into the equation. But I also want to introduce the idea of our own perceptions. A look in the mirror for all of us to understand, do we really know the voice of the people who we are trying to recruit and trying to retain into these positions? This graphic is showing that the reasons most often cited by administrators as to why people are leaving the profession. And as you would guess, personal reasons is a sort of metaphorical other, the catch-all. But number two, retirement, and then of course, better salaries, which we all anticipate as being part of the reason people are leaving. But the reality is, it's not that at all. It's burnout, stress, job pressure, and lack of support. And that again falls to us. So when we look at this next generation of education, we have a very balanced issue of supply and demand. We also have partners across the metaphorical road that need our help. It is critical that we as educators bridge the gap between the institutes of higher ed who are providing the very supply that's going to help us solve the issues, and then also look at what we're doing internally to help support the fact that the demand is because we are losing educators at an alarming rate. So what do we do about it? Looking at strategic human capital management is like the next generation of how we need to approach this issue. But because I love a good metaphor, and I did get the ever so famous post-lunch slot, thank you. Okay, guy in the blue, you got the memo to laugh. Thank you, sir. All right, if I had a microphone that moves, I would, because normally I would come out in there, and I could move mine. Tell me what this is.
It's a cubby.
Cubby holes. Okay. Are all of the slots the same size?
Generally speaking, yes.
Generally speaking, yes. Okay. Made up of generally the same material. Finite number of cubbies. Pretty standard. Pretty fixed. This is typically, with obvious exceptions, typically how we see some of our systems, our operations, technologies, and systems. They're a little bit more static and absolute once we put them into place. There are obvious things that are playing against us, funding, etc. But just go with me on the metaphor of the cubbies. Okay? Can I get an agreement on that? Okay. Now what is this? They're what? People, yes. Think about Dr. Howard's presentation this morning when he was talking about the diversity of our students and the stories that our students are telling every day, the lives that they're going home to, the pain that they're coming to us with, the joys that they're coming to us with. They're human beings, albeit a little bit shorter than us, but they're human beings. But guess what? So are our employees. They look different, they act different. Did any of my HR people know? Can I get an amen from HR? They act different? But they all have different needs, different experiences, and different lives that come with them every day too. And HR is a little bit more fluid and transitional. But the business of the next generation educator is actually this. It's all of those people with different needs and different stories and different worlds behind them fitting into the systems and the organizational structures that we've created. And that changes every single day. And so what are we doing to make it easier for them to do business with us? What are we doing to adapt our cubbies so that the transition is easier, so that it fits their needs better? Could we reconstruct the cubbies to make it a little bit more comfortable? Could we provide maybe some color to it? What are we doing to look at the organizational structure to better fit the people who we're putting in there? That, my friends, is the business of HR. And it's everybody on deck. Because what happens when this goes back to blank? Is if we are looking at the trends we've talked about thus far, this is a not so far off reality that we might be seeing. If fewer and fewer people are choosing the profession, we need to make it so that the grid looks back like this and we have fewer people missing. So in looking at human capital management in a broader scope, we see a lot of different things that are happening in some of the progressive districts that are really starting to see that collaboration of leadership come to that metaphorical table, where we see that these districts look at every single interaction of an employee or with an employee as an opportunity for recruitment and retention. How many people see technology as an integral part of onboarding? How about operations? Okay, good. Well, you guys are ahead of me in the deck, then we can just skip ahead. I'm just kidding. But we really do need to look at onboarding as not just the initial part of our introduction to our districts and to our overall organizations. But onboarding needs to be an everyday thing, because if we are actually going to get this hire to retire process completed, we need to recognize that onboarding is ongoing. It is always. When technology policies change, that's re-onboarding someone. And what are we doing to go beyond just the onboarding to the district or to your organization, but rather to the job? Okay, when we were thinking about our hiring statistics, we would hire anywhere from 240 to 250 special education assistants a year. We were putting over 385 on average substitutes in classrooms every single day. Sometimes more, if it was the Friday before Christmas, and they all had to go shopping. Okay. Anybody doing substitute management, you probably know their name. But what were we doing to onboard and to bring those folks into the mix too? So when we look at the old way of thinking versus the new way of thinking, I just invite you to expand your lens and see what you can do and what ideas you might have to transition yourselves from the old way to the new way. The old way of thinking, where the department leader is the department leader and there are silo walls on the outside of my thinking, and decisions that impact my process and my procedure exist within my silo walls. That's just not a reality that we can be okay with anymore. We have to now be willing to break down that silo wall and look at the leader next to us, go up the stairs and say, what are you doing in your department? What can I do in mine to make your job better? What can we all do to support this idea of engagement? Because if that cubbyhole graphic is your department, that's going to impact you in your work too. So engagement and human capital management from a strategic standpoint really is an everyone business. So now I'd like to take a quick look at some examples of just, when I say examples, truly just a few of the many that we could talk about. And we're going to talk about some statistics that are initially going to look very HR to you. So, HR friends in the room, myself included, we've got the HR decoder ring, a gold star to anybody that recognizes this graphic. Yes. Okay. Come on. Wake it up, yes. Okay, gold star. You gotta love the after lunch crowd. All right, but yes, this is the double gold star for anybody that knows what the secret message was. Yes. I love Ohio. Y'all rock. Okay. Okay, technology friends. Think about technology's role in engagement. It's not normally the first thing we think about. But let's actually talk about if we were to be looking at the one chemistry teacher or the one math teacher. I can remember my favorite year in human resources. Of course, I had 19 years total to choose from. But the entire state of Tennessee had one chemistry education graduate. Do you want to take a guess how many emails and phone calls that one person got? Imagine though if that person were to say, you know what, I'm going to look at the district that has the most opportunity of support for me. What if that district hadn't quite made that technology leap that they needed to? Could technology really be a factor in someone's decision of what their end career goal would be? Sure. Because I know if it's more of an archaic paper-based model, whereas the district next door does have more opportunity for me to be advanced in technology that's closer to what my students are going to be using, might that be a factor in engagement? So technology, you do have a role. And think about all of the people that you are supporting every single day to make their job easier. Because you want to talk about a meltdown, if my laptop goes down, it's bad. It's so bad. And my technology team said, okay, Cydney, you only get 7 calls a week. but think about how much we are dependent in technology and how critical your role is in supporting not only engagement, but in retention. Because an employee who is properly supported by your technology departments is going to be far more likely to stay in their role. One of my favorite topics to talk about is your substitute programs. How many of you have, let's say, we'll go back to the term of substitute shortage, fill rate issues, problems recruiting substitutes? Yes? Is that, okay. Is substitute program and substitute recruitment on top of mind? How many of you have dedicated programs that are designed to support and encourage your substitute teachers? How many of you, and these are all just pondering, marinate for later, how many of you are training your substitutes? Couple hands. Think about this. Again, going back to your dentist office with your highlights magazine. How many of you, when you were thinking about making that choice about a profession, said, you know what? Forget ballerina, forget rock star, forget Wonder Woman. I want to be somebody who is considered just a babysitter, just breath on a mirror, that no matter how well I do, I'm not going to be rewarded for it, that every single day is my first day. Then I'm going to be the one person that doesn't wear the red shirt on Spirit Day. That everybody else in the school has a mascot. But I don't have any colors or colleagues. Who's my mascot? Where are my colors? What are you doing, either through your existing substitute programs or even through technology, where you can create a system of engagement that supports your substitutes? Then from there, if you have an engaged substitute group, what then will that do for your teachers? If I am a teacher and I am afraid to leave my classroom for professional development because I'm not convinced that a substitute is going to keep instruction going, I'm going to be fearful of interrupted instruction and may not be as apt to go seek that support that is going to be the very support that keeps me in my classroom. Don't dismiss the power of the substitute program. And I will, of course, I can't not mention the video or the photo that we have here. This was our initiation day for our absence program. I will tell you that our substitutes had a mascot. It was the flip-flop. Because they're flip-flopping between schools. Get it? Hey, it's something. And Old Navy had a sale, so it was easier to. But we had a mascot. We had a virtual schoolhouse where everyone got to see videos or samples and images of the flip-flop. Every orientation class was a class of number 1, 2, just like K-12, class of 1995. They were the class of 1, 2, 6, it ended up being like 58. But they wore little buttons for the class of. And whenever they went into the building and saw another substitute with that class of, guess what? They weren't the person that had their first day. They had a colleague. They had somebody that was part of them. So think about things like that you as an organization can get with communications, can get with technology, can get with operations, and really start to build a program of people who are going to be the very people who ensure uninterrupted instruction, and then also ensure that your teachers, who you're trying so desperately to keep, have the freedom to go develop and grow the way they need to. Speaking of absences, how many of you have a absence reason that's school business? Professional absences. Most of you do. I won't make you raise your hand, but I will ask you to honestly ponder, do you know what that means? And I'm not talking about learning. I'm talking about professionally driven or caused absences. We talk so often about fill rate issues, we talk about staffing issues, but guess what, friends? Some of it is our fault. If we look at professional absences as a reason why teachers are having to be outside of the classrooms, can we ask ourselves if there might be something that is within our control where we can reduce that a little bit? How many of those absences are we causing? And oh, by the way, if we are requiring teachers to be out of the classroom for professionally related reasons, again, I'm not saying learning, saying field trips, meetings, whatever the case may be, district caused absences, we probably know that in advance. Look at this statistic. We're looking at national data versus Ohio. And on the right-hand side, you see the fill rate by leave time. This is a statistic over 300 districts in the state of Ohio. For absences that were professionally related, entered 4 days or less before that absence, the fill rate on average was 78%. 4 or more days, 93. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that most of you would be better off or happier with a 93% fill rate than a 78% fill rate. So here is an opportunity for us to take a step back and look at the very reason we're looking at these statistics. These statistics on first glance look as if they are mainly HR, but are they? Again, going back to the story, I will never forget the Thursday night at 7:30 when my elementary school director called and said, "Cydney, I am so sorry." Well, no conversation ever goes well when that particular principal especially calls and says we have a problem. "We are having that math PLC tomorrow, and I completely forgot to have your teacher or the teachers enter their absences." "Oh, okay, is it just your second grade at XYZ school?" "No, all of them. All of them." "All of who?" "All of the math teachers." "Okay, so what you're saying is on a Friday, all of our math teachers are going to be out. We've got about 12 hours to fix this." This looks like an HR statistic, but it's an everybody one. It's professional learning. Are your level directors, are your leaders looking at what absences are we causing that we might be able to plan for and collaborate so that we're better prepared for those students who woke up Friday morning ready for an education and had to walk into their school without a substitute that day? This is instruction, professional development, HR, business, it's all of us. And that's why this next statistic will really start to bring this idea home. The cost of professional related absences. This is an analysis from the state of Ohio. And we looked at all of the 300 plus districts, which we did have validated by the Center for Research and Learning for the Johns Hopkins University, validated as predictive and valid for representation across the U.S. The cost of professionally related absences in the state of Ohio on an annual basis costs the state, or the districts within it, almost $36 million. And these are absences that many of us don't even know why they're out. Now, if we look at a 1% decrease, just 1%, that's maybe getting the meeting, the central office meeting. That's maybe implementing, well, let's say a webinar instead of an in-person meeting. Just a small change in what absences you are driving at the district level. 1% would reduce by almost $358,000. Now, granted, this is the state, but take it down to your organizations and the districts within your organization. If you were to decrease by just 1%, might that even be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000? And just like we talked about before, money doesn't grow on trees, and I'm pretty confident that all of you would find something fabulous to do with that money. Maybe an incentive program for your substitutes. Maybe a highlights subscription. Maybe anything that's going to help improve the instructional outcomes within your organizations. Just 1%. And then take it across the board and see what you can do with 2, 3, or even more. Now, the ultimate goal for all of us is the impact on instructional time. If you take the same data, we can look at Ohio's fill rates. On average, you were filling 91% of your absences. That means there are almost 26,000 classrooms unfilled by a substitute. annually. That's over 1.5 million lost instructional days for students. Do you think this will get the attention of some of the other leaders in your organization? Do you think maybe this would cause some collaboration? And going back to Dr. Howard's message this morning, and it was an amazing one, and I am so honored to have gotten to be a part of his presentation, because so much of what he said about being able to offer equity and equality to students is very present here too. We need to provide the front line that same equity in what we're doing to support them. And we can, if we just take the time to get together as a collaborative group and look at the options to return some of the investment back into the classrooms. These next few slides, I'm actually going to try to help us make up a little bit of our time. But I want us to remember that recruitment and retention isn't just about teachers. We talked a lot about substitute, and that was by design, because I think shining the light on our substitute programs is really pivotal, because I think it's one of the most impactful ways that we can really start to speak to instruction and support mechanisms in our schools. If we look at how often we are posting positions, this slide is showing us that on average, in Ohio, you are posting almost 3 times more classified or hourly type positions than you are teaching. So efforts for focus on instructional recruitment and retention are obviously very important. But think about once those teachers are in place, how are you supporting them? You can't teach a hungry child. That was always one of the things my superintendent started every single day with. He went downstairs as often as he could and sat with those kids and ate breakfast with them. The child that Dr. Howard spoke about, when that little girl got on the bus in the morning, can you imagine how powerful it would have been if the bus driver just said good morning, gave her a big smile, gave her a high five? Every single employee that walks through the walls or the doors of those districts have the opportunity to make an impact on those students. So when we are out there recruiting, let's make sure they know that. And what does the volume of applications look like? In Ohio, you're actually getting quite a few more applications for your teaching positions than you are the classified positions. So again, I invite you to take a really good look at what you can do to expand your scope to not only collaboration, but to recognize that every single employee that walks through the doors of your district has the opportunity to impact your students. And at the end of the day, don't be afraid to celebrate. Don't be afraid to use retention as a way to recruit. Don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid to get out there in the middle of a festival with a football team wearing a really big, funny graduation hat and have your technology department, your schools, showcase and celebrate what's great about them. Because you know what that does? Everybody loves to celebrate. And I'll tell you what, you get your principals, your department directors, give them just a chance to stop the train for one day and say, you know what, we did great. And we want to tell everybody about it. And you know what, that's going to make people feel proud. And you know what that just did too? It created hundreds more recruiters for you. Because if I'm happy about the story that I have to tell, and I want to go out in the middle of a festival and tell it, I'm telling it in line at Walmart too. And those are the people that really need to be out there showcasing your story. So on that note, I'd like to return to the concepts that we talked about earlier today and to talk about Dr. Howard's commitment to data, to be able to everybody come to the table and to celebrate what we are all doing, and that is making an environment full of jobs worth choosing. Because who wouldn't choose the chance to make a difference in a child's life every day? Thank you so much for having me.